This is BBC News, the headlines at 2 o'clock. After the snow comes the ice. Frozen Britain shivers as Arctic winds cause temperatures to plummet to a record low of -17 in some parts of the country.
I'm 38 and a half weeks pregnant and trying to get up the hill to get to the hospitals.
I'm Alison Harper in Hampshire, where thousands of homeowners have been without power in freezing, plummeting temperatures for almost a day.
I'm Judith Moritz at Woodford in Cheshire, where at -17.6 Celsius last night, this was one of the coldest places in Britain.
I'm Claire Marshall in Warwickshire. I'm in a village which has been almost totally cut off from the outside world.
A storm in a teacup. Gordon Brown's verdict on the attempt to oust him as Prime Minister.
Parliamentary expenses. MPs learn what they will and won't be able to claim for.
Also coming up in the next hour, the show's over. Jonathan Ross is to leave the BBC following months of controversy over his pay and his programmes.
13 years in the BBC. I think it's probably not a bad time for me to move on and probably not a bad time for them either.
And a nail-biting final session in South Africa as England tried to avoid defeat in the third test. Hello, very good afternoon to you. The big freeze looks set to last until the middle of next week. Temperatures overnight in some parts of the UK neared -18 degrees. Snow has turned into ice and driving conditions have become treacherous.
Yes, up to 25,000 homes are without electricity in southern England after power cables collapsed. Thousands of schools have remained closed and there's been widespread delays and cancellations to rail services and flights from many major airports. Danny Savage reports.
Freezing temperatures and fresh snow led to treacherous roads across much of Britain this morning, making journeys hazardous. Here in Suffolk, a severe weather warning has been issued, with police saying the situation is likely to get worse. In the Scottish borders, where schools have been closed until next week, sub-zero temperatures mean there is little prospect of conditions here improving. Routine hospital appointments across the region have been cancelled as work continues to try and keep the main roads open. Much of northeast England has also been gridlocked by the blanket of snow that has covered the Pennines and the lowlands either side. Here in Norfolk, like so many places, cars needed a push to get going on the snow and ice.
I'm 38 and a half weeks pregnant and trying to get up the hill to get to the hospital, so...
And how bad has it been?
Not too bad, really. It's come from Easton. It's only till we got to the slip road that it's been this bad. But hey-ho, hopefully we'll get up the hill in a second.
It's all right if you keep moving, but once you stop, that's it, you're stuck.
With salt levels running low, councils across the UK are now prioritising which roads are being treated. That usually means minor routes are being ignored. This morning, the government issued this statement about levels of grit.
The government and the devolved administrations have also decided that due to the exceptional weather affecting the country, they should work in partnership to advise salt suppliers on priorities for deliveries. The LGA will assist with this process.
Schools in many counties are closed again today. East Anglia has some of the highest numbers of school children off as the weather here deteriorates. In Folkestone, many of them again took advantage of some traditional winter sports. And as the cold snap continues, every night brings temperatures lower than the one before. It fell to -14 Celsius in Scotland last night, and the forecast is for it to be as low as -20 by the end of the week, which means there may be more rafts of ice for these birds on the River Clyde. Danny Savage, BBC News.
Well, we're going to be with our correspondents across the UK. Alison Harper is in Clanfield in Hampshire, which, from where I'm sitting, Alison, looks absolutely beautiful.
It is beautiful, but it's absolutely freezing cold, Louise. And can you imagine a day like yesterday with freezing temperatures, going home to find that there is no power, to sit there with no power overnight and wake up maybe in a freezing cold home to come out to more of all of this. There have been around 4,000 homes in this area of Hampshire without power overnight. Many are still without now. In Sussex, around 2,000 homes were without power. That was in Crawley and Brighton. But let's have a look at what the main problem was. And the problem was snow on branches, on big trees. The branches would break, bringing down power lines. There was also the weight of all the heavy ice on the power lines, which kind of triggered the safety mechanisms which cut off the power to all those homes. So it's been a freezing cold night for many people. The energy companies says they do have engineers out there trying to do all the repairs, but just like all of us, they are having problems getting to the source of the problem on these roads. And just have a look around us now here in Clanfield in Hampshire. You can see the roads are quite clear, they are passable, but nobody's out. People are still collecting their abandoned cars. Just yesterday, there were thousands of abandoned cars around here. Today, I'd say there are several hundred still left, but apart from that, the roads are almost deserted.
OK, Alison Harper in Hampshire, thank you.
OK, well, let's go now to Ben Ando. He is in Stowmarket in Suffolk, and we looked at a very sunny scene in Hampshire. Ben, where you are, those sky looks a little heavier.
Well, that's right. I mean, although I have to say that in some ways in this area it feels as if they've escaped the worst, at least so far. There was some very heavy snowfall in the early hours of this morning in Norfolk and in northern Suffolk. There was snow here as well during this morning. There have been squalls of it, but nothing really heavy. And as you may be able to see behind me here, the roads here are open. Most of the primary roads certainly have been gritted and are passable. Of course, in this area, though, as you've heard, a large number of schools are closed. Around 500,000 school children in the east of England are not at school today, and of course that creates its own problems because many of those parents, if they're both working, one will have to not go to work. So even when roads are passable, it can mean that parents who perhaps work for small businesses or organisations that need them to turn up to work, they can't go to work, and that can create difficulties too.
OK, Ben Ando there, thank you very much for that.
Well, let's talk about the gritting and how are local authorities coping with demand for salt during this severe weather. We can speak to John Maguire, who's at a gritting depot in Chippenham in Wiltshire for us now. How much have they got left there?
They've got a good supply left. They're getting more supplies this afternoon. Every local authority is having to tell the government every morning just how much supply they've got. The message from here, from Wiltshire up to the government this morning, was that they had 2,000 tonnes. So a good deal yet to keep them going for a few days. It's worth always remembering, of course, that there are two areas of responsibility. The Highways Agency does the motorways and trunk roads, the key A roads. Local authorities, local councils take care of the other more minor routes, if you like. Here's a gritter, very familiar sight on our roads, of course, over the last couple of weeks. Even a snow plough at the front there, that's been put into good use, especially over the last 24 hours or so. Rock salt goes in the top, comes down through this hopper here, which spins round and spreads it across the road. Now, there's an interesting double-edged sword, really, for gritting when you think about it. We're encouraging drivers not to take to the roads because of the hazardous conditions, especially overnight last night, where we had such low temperatures, causing the melted snow to freeze rock hard. But you do need motorists to go across the salt to agitate it, to make sure that it works effectively to melt the salt. Here in Wiltshire, they'll use, well, basically anything they can get their hands on. But at the moment here, this is more of a white salt, not the red stuff that we're used to seeing. The reason why they use this is because, effectively, it makes less of a mess. Particularly think about shopkeepers, things like that, people walking through muddy areas and carrying it into shops. There's a concern that it does create a mess. So this is a much sort of cleaner material, if you like. And this is how it works, of course. This is what we've had so much of, snow here. And then more recently, things have been compacted down, frozen overnight. Salt goes on. And as I was saying earlier, what you then need is for motorists, for tyres to go over, to agitate it, to melt it. There is, though, a problem because of these incredibly low temperatures. The salt is only effective down to about -6, -7 degrees. Anything lower than that, and its efficiency is greatly diminished. So we're expecting more supplies here into Wiltshire this afternoon, as we are across the country. The government says things are under control. They're working hard to secure more supplies, but the AA warns today that the system is creaking at its seams. You can see just briefly behind me, they're working flat out. They'll continue to do so as long as the cold weather remains in place. Back to you.
OK, John, that's been fascinating watching. Thank you.
Yeah, well, let's go way north up to the Scottish borders now. James Cook is there for us. And James, I heard Alex Salmond saying this was possibly the worst winter since that one nearly 50 years ago.
Yes, he reckons it's the worst winter now in Scotland since 1963, and I think probably quite a few people might be inclined to start agreeing with him at this stage. It has been incredibly cold. It's still very cold again just now, well below freezing here in the Scottish borders. Almost the entire country is below freezing at the moment, and that's causing particular problems, for example, for one RAF helicopter, which is sitting outside Borders General Hospital in Melrose, about 15 miles south of where we are here in Lauder at the moment. That whether or not it was actually the weather that caused the helicopter to become stuck there waiting outside the hospital is not entirely clear at the moment, but it may well have had something to do with it. Engineers working to try to get it back up. It had come down to help with a medical case to move somebody from one hospital to another. The fact that helicopter is actually just stuck there has been a bit of a problem, because they could have done with a helicopter today. They needed a helicopter to airlift a sick baby from Borders General Hospital in Melrose up to a special care baby unit, an intensive care unit in Glasgow, and they had to send another air ambulance down to do that. It's on the ground now waiting to pick up the baby in question. So just quite a lot of problems here. That just underlines how difficult it's been for many people.
James, I was just looking at a guy behind you there walking down the pavement very, very gingerly indeed. These are dangerous times, particularly I would imagine for the elderly who have to go about and get their shopping in and everything else.
Yes, I mean, very much so. As you can see, people picking their way down on the pavements here. I mean, it is pretty slippy. This is a side road. This is not the main road here in Lauder, and it is just very difficult, especially if you're elderly. We talked to one elderly lady earlier on today, and she was saying, this is not so much fun when you get to my age, let me tell you.
OK, James Cook, thank you very much there on the borders.
It's not even fun at my age. I slipped over today. Also, getting food and basic supplies to shops in smaller towns and villages across the country is proving really difficult because of the weather. Distributors have had particular problems getting access to link roads in the West Midlands, and that means that empty shelves in some shops. Let's get the very latest from our correspondent Claire Marshall, who's in the Warwickshire village of Preston-on-Stour. What's going on there, Claire?
Well, it's been a village that's been almost completely cut off for the last few days. The gritters don't get down this far. So it was a local farmer who came out with his shovel and his tractor and cleared the roads himself. Now, this is where people come for cream teas in the summer, would you believe it? It's hard to imagine that. And then this car here, this clearly hasn't been anywhere for a few days. But it's kind of got a wartime feel about it, this village. It really has. Everyone's talking about banding together and kind of sharing 4x4 vehicles to get out and about and actually get supplies. Now, with me is Nina Harding, who runs the local shop. She's been performing an incredible task about getting actually people food and supplies in. It's been tough, hasn't it, Nina?
It has, yeah. We didn't have any milk or bread or coal, so we've had people going out, obviously in 4x4s and collecting bread and milk for everybody. The milk actually came in a tractor from the local village, so yeah, and coal, everybody's been out to get that for people. We're just starting to see a few supplies come through now, but yeah, oil and things like that for people. Central heating hasn't got here.
And people are only just starting to really get out and about.
Yeah, literally today. Yesterday there was nobody out of the village, and obviously it was a great atmosphere. Everybody was helping each other out and helping the people who couldn't get out and about. Obviously the elderly who needed supplies, everybody took them out to them.
And in the shop, you've had your own problems with it, where there burst pipes, I understand.
We did, but luckily we had a plumber nearby who came and rescued us quite quickly, so that was all back and sorted. But yeah, there was a few people, you know, with heating and, you know, things like that happening. But yeah, no, it was great. It's a great atmosphere, and everybody helped out, and we're hopefully, fingers crossed, no more snow.
Well, that's not what the forecast says, maybe. It's certainly going to be cold. Nina Harding, thank you very much indeed. From here in Preston-on-Stour, Warwickshire, back to you.
OK, Claire, thank you.
Well, amid the harsh conditions, a number of different places across the UK have been competing for the title of coldest location. I don't want to be there. Temperatures of -17 were recorded last night in Oxfordshire. Tonight, parts of the Scottish Highlands could reach -20. Our correspondent Judith Moritz is in Woodford in Cheshire. Judith, just how cold has it got there?
Well, at the moment it's -5.4 Celsius, and I'm here to tell you personally that it's pretty nippy. But overnight the temperatures here were so low that it was colder than the temperature recommended for a domestic freezer.
Like everywhere in Britain, the village of Woodford has been freezing cold recently. But the big chill got even chillier last night when local thermometers registered a new low of -17.6 degrees Celsius. It means that Woodford was even colder than Moscow overnight, something these car salesmen were trying to get to grips with as they cleared their forecourt this morning.
Nightmare. Nothing worse for for the motor trade. You know, weather like this, it just kills the job totally. When you're working in it, it doesn't feel, we were just saying before, it doesn't feel as cold as what they're saying, but it's when you stop that you do feel the cold.
Down the road at the garden centre, it wasn't good weather for ducks. Their pond has iced over, and some of the outdoor plants and flowers have been affected by the extreme temperatures too. It may look very picturesque, but they're saying it could be bad for business.
We're going to look very carefully at our stock as soon as we get a chance to do that. We offer a 5-year guarantee on our stock, so we want to make sure that it's absolutely in perfect condition, anything that we sell here at Woodford. I do think we will lose stock, possibly as much as 20%.
Not everyone minds the plunging temperatures, and there are plenty of scenic views to admire. But don't hold out for a cuppa here at the moment. The milk has been delivered, but it's a fair bet that you'll have to have your tea or coffee black.
So it is a bit of an understatement, pretty parky here, but how's it going on forwards? Well, actually, it could have been worse even in Canada overnight. In Calgary, it was minus 24 Celsius, so spare a thought for people living there. Here in Woodford, they're not promising balmy temperatures this evening, but they are hoping it'll be a little bit warmer, possibly as much as minus 10 degrees Celsius. So not tropical, far from it, a little bit warmer, but on the downside, they're not ruling out the possibility of more snow.
Judith, thank you very much indeed.
And she did look a little bit frozen. Let's talk to Caroline Spellman. She's Shadow Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government. She joins us from our Westminster studio. Now, afternoon to you. We know that Sadiq Khan saying that everybody is doing everything possible to keep the road network going. Are they doing enough, do you think?
Well, I think it's right to pay tribute to councils for doing their very best to keep the road network open. But the reason I asked a government minister to come to Parliament today was because, born of the experience of the chaos caused by the snow in February last year, councils actually produced a report for the government in July, and the government sat on it for 5 months and only came up with its recommendations on the 15th of December, which your viewers might recall was about 48 hours before the snow started falling very heavily in the southeast.
And what did that report say? Is it asking for more grit, or what does it say?
It made a series of recommendations to the government, just born of the experience of the grit shortages in February. One of those was to increase the stocks held by councils, but other things like, for example, asking the government to be flexible about regulations governing drivers' hours so that the council's employees who are driving up to the Cheshire salt mines to collect that salt can actually make those round trips more effectively. And I think councils were very disappointed that it took 5 months for the government to respond to that series of recommendations.
I mean, the thing is that this, they're saying, aren't they, the Met Office, this is what once in a 20-year, once in a 30-year event. So what is the point, in some ways, actually even beginning to plan for it?
Well, there were very definitely lessons out of last year's experience. You might recall that the Highways Agency had priority over the grit and salt supplies in February last year, and that left councils short. We've got a different kind of problem emerging now, which is that it's a very prolonged period. There are localised shortages, which the councils themselves are trying to resolve by sharing their grit supplies. But one of the questions that Sadiq Khan was asked in the Commons today is, what are the criteria that the government used to prioritise salt supplies going to different parts of the country? I think it's going to become very important if these adverse conditions continue for very much longer, which they seem set to do, to understand how are the priorities decided.
OK, and just kind of on a personal level, how are your constituents faring with all this weather?
Well, I've been listening very carefully to your own snow reports because, like most MPs, I'm presently in Westminster, just about to hit the M40 back up to Warwick. Obviously, it was shut at Banbury yesterday. My understanding is that it's open, but in common with a lot of your reports, the difficulty that local authorities are having is they're having to prioritise more bigger roads, leaving some of the side roads closed. And a lot of your listeners will know one of the problems is with pavements. So the government has been asked what it could do to help us as citizens clear those pavements without fear of a legal challenge if people slip up on the piece of pavement outside your own home. So there are a lot more things I think the government could be doing right now.
OK, I'm Caroline Spellman. Thanks very much and good luck with your journey.
Yes, just a bit of other travel news to give you from Eurostar. This time it's now running a limited service following the breakdown of a Brussels to London train in the tunnel this morning. Eurotunnel is only allowing one Eurostar train at a time in the tunnel, which means that travellers should be prepared for big delays. Sorry, I can't bring you better news on that, but at least the Eurostar trains are starting to move.
And we will, of course, be back with all our correspondents across the UK throughout the afternoon to keep you right up to date. And in the next hour, we're going to talk to somebody about how you should be driving in these treacherous conditions,
and you
how
say,
to help yourself.
And you were saying you fell over?
I fell over, yeah, on
bruises?
an ungritted... Yes.
And what did
on
you
an
do?
ungritted road.
And what did you do to recover?
I stood up.
No, you bought yourself a pair of expensive ski boots. That's what
Thanks.
happened.
Thanks.
Nice furry boots. I thought I'd just drop you in it.
Thanks very much. They're very useful.
Right, but you're here, which is great. Time now, 21 minutes past 2 o'clock. Our headline so far this afternoon. Snow and sub-zero temperatures across the UK are making travel hazardous. Forecasters say the freezing conditions are set to continue for up to a week.
Jonathan Ross is to leave the BBC after 13 years. He'll go when his contract expires in July.
Gordon Brown has brushed off the latest challenge to his leadership as a storm in a teacup. He insisted he'd spent little time considering the challenge to his leadership.
And in sport, England are hanging on in their battle to save the third test in South Africa. Paul Collingwood and Ian Bell are fighting hard for a draw. Bell has reached his 50 and England are now 262 for 5.
Get to his 50.
Patrick Vieira will have a medical at Manchester City today, with the club hoping to complete his transfer from Inter Milan in the next 48 hours. The French midfielder wants to leave Inter for more first-team football ahead of the World Cup. And Great Britain's 4x400 metres relay team are to receive gold medals after losing out to the US at the 1997 World Championships. A member of the American team admitted taking drugs. And I'll be back with more on those stories a little later on.
Good stuff, Richard. Thank you.
Richard, thanks. See you later. Now, Gordon Brown has described the attempt to force him out of number 10 as a storm in a teacup. Yesterday, two former Cabinet Ministers, Jeff Hoon and Patricia Hewitt, tried to persuade Labour MPs to hold a secret leadership ballot. Our political correspondent Gary O'Donoghue reports.
Had things gone really badly, then Downing Street might have been filled with removal vans this morning. Instead, Gordon Brown remains in residence. He was due to be touring southern England today to launch his growth strategy. That's off because of the weather, though his interview with BBC Local Radio did go ahead, and his first reaction to the failed coup against him.
So it's taken up very little of my time. I think it's one of these sidelines in this time when people are far more worried about, as they should be, about what we're doing to deal with the weather and how we're making sure that people are safe and secure. So it's not going to take up much of my time, and hasn't certainly taken up much of my time today or will in future.
So less than 24 hours after the plot was launched, it looks to be dead in the water. You can count those who've come out publicly in support of it on the fingers of two hands. So why did it fail? And why did the plotters, who thought cabinet ministers would follow, why did they get it so wrong? As the authors of the letter calling for a ballot toured the TV studios, a number of cabinet ministers seemed slow to respond to inquiries about their attitude to the plot. For example, it wasn't until 5:20 in the afternoon that the Justice Secretary, Jack Straw, offered his support to the Prime Minister, a full 5 hours after the plot became public. Harriet Harman, the Deputy Leader, issued her statement 40 minutes later at 6 p.m. And it took the Foreign Secretary, David Miliband, until 10 to 7 to get his words out, and even then, they weren't exactly effusive about the Prime Minister. Today, at least, some of those cabinet ministers were treading a little less gingerly.
We've got an election to fight. Gordon is leading us into it. We're determined to win it under his leadership, and I'm looking forward to getting stuck into it.
It was completely ill-judged and very ill-advised, and all of us made that clear yesterday. And as for Gordon Brown's leadership, I actually think it will have the effect of bringing people behind his leadership even more.
This has all been manna from heaven for the opposition parties, as this Conservative poster makes all too clear.
Well, look, this is incredibly depressing for the country, because this is a time when we need strong leadership and a united government, and instead we've got weak leadership and a completely disunited government.
It's been a treacherous 24 hours for Prime Minister and public alike. Both will be hoping the worst is soon over. Gary O'Donoghue, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's go live now to our political correspondent Carol Walker at Westminster Forum. Carol, can any good be said to have come out of this?
Well, I think that Gordon Brown will hope that perhaps those who want to remove him will have seen this as their last possible attempt before the general election. It is still possible that as the reverberations continue over the next few days, that there could be some sort of further moves. But I think many people do feel that this effort to force a leadership ballot has fizzled out. Jeff Hoon, one of those behind it, appeared to accept that last night. And certainly cabinet ministers may well now feel that they've passed their last possible opportunity if they were going to move against the Prime Minister, simply because it's now getting so close to the last possible date for a general election. So I think if you were looking for the silver clouds, those would be them. But I think for Gordon Brown to dismiss this as a storm in a teacup is somewhat wishful thinking. For a while at least, this did appear to shake his grip on power. Now, in the end, it blew itself out. It didn't amount to much, but it did take quite some time before the cabinet ministers rallied to his support. And when they did so, those messages of support were somewhat lukewarm.
And Carol, if part of the complaint is that Gordon Brown doesn't seem to understand the scale of the problem, is there a danger that that response, it's a storm in a teacup, will kind of further convince some of those Labour doubters we're still not getting this right?
Well, I think it's very difficult to see how else he could have responded to this. Because of the proximity of the general election, I think for him to say now, well, I'm going to change my whole approach, would have rung pretty hollow and could potentially have been even more destabilising. I think he now feels that the only thing he can do, as his spokesman told us repeatedly this morning he was doing, is focusing on the job, focusing on dealing with the problems that there are at the moment with the snow, with the efforts to find a way back to economic growth and so on. I think if he were to have been seen to have wavered, then that could have been very dangerous indeed. He will now hope that he has seen off the rebels and will be hoping that he can now remain Prime Minister through the next general election.
OK. Carol, thank you very much.
Let's take you back now to the freezing conditions around the UK. Councillor David Sparks is chairman of the Local Government Association's Transport Board, and he joins us now from our Birmingham studio. I expect you're having a pretty busy time of it. Just give us a sort of idea, how many gritters are out there on the roads?
Oh, I think there's several thousand gritters. We've gritted enough to go round. They've done enough mileage to go around the world nearly 70 times now.
OK, round the world 70 times, but there are roads not being gritted. How do you choose which ones are gritted, which ones aren't?
Each local authority has a plan that's worked on in terms of priorities, houses, hospitals, public transport routes, and it can be amended according to changes in circumstances. It's never been the case that all roads throughout the UK are being gritted. You always have to prioritise.
OK, some of the priorities are making it very difficult for people. Obviously, slip roads, for example. Why would they not be gritted?
That would be for the Highways Agency. Slip roads are usually gritted as part of the motorway network.
OK. And tell me, also we know that some councils haven't got enough grit, some perhaps have more than they need. Are they negotiating? How is it working to get grit to the councils that don't have it?
We have a well-organised system which, first of all, is based on individual councils having supplies. Secondly, that's backed up by councils having arrangements with neighbouring authorities to switch supplies. And when we've got a really unusual situation where the whole of the country is covered in snow, then the government step in and allocate supplies of salt.
And that's what's happening now, is it?
That's the situation now. It's part of a well-worked-out contingency. The government are making sure that the salt that there is goes to those areas most in need.
As you say, really exceptional circumstances. Do you think, though, lessons will be learned, things will have to change for the next time this might happen?
We are, in local government, continually learning lessons so that we can improve our performance. Only in the summer I initiated an investigation into last February's events, and I know the Minister is particularly keen that we do the same thing in relation to this current experience so that we can get better at dealing with problems such as extreme weather.
Yes, it seems a bit strange you haven't learnt the lessons already from February, though, doesn't it?
No, we have learnt the lessons from February, and that's why we haven't run out of salt. That's why we're not getting the complaints that we've had before. The current weather situation is totally different to what we had in February.
OK, Councillor David Sparks, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And Councillor Sparks was talking about the weather and whether it was different to what we had in February. Well, let's find out what the weather's going to be like for the next few hours, day for us. Here's Sarah. Hiya.
Hello there, John. Well, there's no real let-up in this wintry weather, at least for the next week, possibly even a couple of weeks. Very, very cold. It took me a long time to de-ice my car this morning. And why was that? Well, we saw temperatures down to nearly -18 last night. This coming night, it could be even colder still, perhaps down as low as -20. It's not quite the coldest weather we've ever had. We have seen temperatures across the UK down to -27 degrees previously, but certainly bitterly cold. And needless to say, weather warnings in force from the Met Office for further heavy snow and widespread ice around as well. For the rest of this afternoon, we have got snow flurries coming in through northeastern parts of England. They're going to continue. This is 6 o'clock this evening, so we will see further flurries to come down into parts of East Anglia and the far southeast as well. Several centimetres more snow to come in some places before the day is out. It's generally a bit of a drier end to the day across southwest of England, but a widespread frost here and still a few wintry showers down towards the far west of Cornwall and even into the Isles of Scilly, the odd flake of snow here, which is a very rare event. Some snow flurries still across parts of Pembrokeshire by around 6 o'clock this evening, but the rest of Wales, it's a dry, bitterly cold story to tell. Clear skies across Northern Ireland during this evening and overnight, so a return to those frosty, icy conditions and severe frost yet again across the whole of Scotland. Still some wintry showers for Aberdeenshire and for the borders as well. Now that's going to be the story overnight. We keep wintry showers for eastern areas, one or two of them moving a little bit further inland throughout the course of the night. But wherever you are, those temperatures are certainly going to plummet, and there is still a risk of very frosty and very icy conditions for Friday morning. Temperatures in our city centres are going to be cold enough, down to between, say, -5 to -9, quite a bit colder than that in the surrounding countryside. So that's how Friday is shaping up. It's going to be a cold start to the day, and for many places that frost will linger throughout the entire day. We've got an easterly breeze now. That's going to bring a risk of snow showers down through East Anglia, the southeast of England, and through northeast England as well. These are the areas that are likely to see snow showers throughout the rest of the week. Now, temperatures 1 or 2 degrees either side of freezing, and it's going to feel even colder than that. Now, why is that? It's all down to this easterly or northeasterly breeze blowing in, bringing bitingly cold temperatures, so feeling a lot lower than it is. And we have got more snow in the forecast, so keep tuned to all your latest weather online or by pressing your red button.
Hello, very good afternoon to you watching BBC News with John Topol and Louise Minchin.
Very good afternoon. Let's get you up to date with the latest summary and more a weather forecast, but here we go. Arctic conditions across the UK have seen temperatures fall to -17 in parts of the country overnight. Thousands of homes have been without electricity and transport disruption continues. Snow and sub-zero temperatures across Britain have turned roads into sheets of ice, making travel hazardous. Forecasters say the freezing conditions could continue well into next week.
Businesses are also suffering from the cold snap as the snow and ice make delivering goods to some parts of the country difficult.
In a BBC interview, Gordon Brown has described the plot to force a secret ballot on his leadership as a storm in a teacup. Number 10 has said that the PM knows he has the full confidence of all Cabinet members. Yesterday, 2 former Cabinet colleagues, Geoff Hoon and Patricia Hewitt, tried to hold a secret leadership ballot.
The way schools in England are judged by inspectors has been criticised for being too complex and unfair. The Committee on Children, Schools and Families questions whether Ofsted will be able to cope with new inspection responsibilities, including colleges and children's services.
UK interest rates have been kept unchanged at 0.5% following the Bank of England's latest meeting. The cost of borrowing has been at a record low since March 2009, and economists don't expect the central bank to raise rates in the near future.
Jonathan Ross is to leave the BBC after 13 years at the corporation. He's been one of the biggest names at the BBC with his Friday night chat show, Radio 2 show and film review programme. But some of his behaviour and details of his pay have caused controversy in recent months.
Now, first we had snow, and now ice is adding to travel problems across the UK, and temperatures in some parts of the country, as we were reporting, have dropped to -17 degrees Celsius. There are treacherous conditions on untreated roads, and thousands of schools remain closed. Now, many parents are unhappy at having to take time off work to care for their children because schools are shut. Well, one of those is Mike Eubank from Croydon, who we can speak to now over the phone. Mike Eubank, thanks very much for being with us. What's happened where your kids are concerned?
Well, yesterday I arrived at school with my children, and of course I found that the school had closed. They had sent out warnings on the internet, but the internet's a small school and the website had collapsed, so we didn't find out till we got to the school gate. And there were lots of other parents obviously in the same situation. And, you know, the conditions weren't that bad. It should have been possible for somebody to get in. But in the end, of course, I ended up going home and I had to care for my children at home. They're young children. They're at primary school, and someone has to look after them. And so, you know, one of the parents, if you've got two parents that are working, one of the parents has to take a day off work. And, you know, it's frustrating.
Yeah, and do you think that the schools are sort of just, I don't know how to put it, giving in too easily, if you like, and kind of first sight of snow, right, we'll shut the school?
Well, I do think that, and, you know, a couple of years ago, the school closed just because the snow was forecast. I was called home from work to pick up my children, and there wasn't even any snow in the playground at all. You know, it's been slightly better since then, but I think a little bit better preparedness from schools would go a long way. You know, I understand, you know, schools aren't a crash and their job is to educate children, but, you know, they could perhaps consider the wide effects of what they're doing, of the costs of what they're doing, when they make the decision whether to close or not.
And presumably, if everyone took that attitude that you're describing, and we're going to speak to the National Association of Head Teachers in a minute, then British industry would have ground to a halt. You know, there'd be no news because we'd have said, actually, we're going to stay at home today, we're not coming in, it's a bit snowy out there.
Well, absolutely. You know, when I got home the other day, you know, the milkman delivered the milk, the postman delivered the post, all the shops were open, everything else was open. And, you know, I appreciate schools have special difficulties, but I would have thought that with a bit of thought, you know, they could introduce, an emergency timetable or get some parental help in, but they should at least make some effort to keep something going.
OK, Mike Eubank, very grateful to you. Thanks very much for being with us.
OK, well, let's get a response to that immediately, actually. Mick Brooks is General Secretary of the National Association of Head Teachers, and he joins us now. I know I've spoken to you before, but let's just put this point to you. If the milkman turns up, the postman turns up, why can't teachers teach at schools?
Various reasons. It depends on where they live, and certainly I've been doing some phoning around and meeting my colleagues since yesterday, and teachers simply not, for instance, being able to get their cars out of the drive. So I think the points Mr. Eubank makes...
The point being, for example, I couldn't get my car to go down the road today, but I'm still here. You know, many thousands of people have done that across the country. Why can't teachers?
Yeah, I agree with that, and there's a difference as to where you live. Most media outlets, including the one I'm sitting in now, happen in cities. In London there is very little snow, therefore it's easy to get around because public transport is still running.
But
for instance, in rural areas where public transport has stopped and it's difficult you just can't get your car out of the drive, there are real difficulties, and we need to see what happens. If this cold snap is going to continue, then clearly we can't have schools closed for weeks.
Yes, I'm interested in that, because he did also talk, didn't he, about sort of contingency plans. There has to come a point when, I don't know, a school's been closed for a week, do the schools feel they have to do something and they might actually get back to work?
Yeah, clearly we're going to have to. I think one of the points that Mr. Eubank made was that the last time his school was closed was a couple of years ago, and we have to put this into context. These are rare occasions, but I think we're going to have to look at. One of the things we need to look at is indeed what the media is saying about whether people should venture out. Because if the media is saying do not go out unless it's absolutely essential, and heads and their governing bodies are exhorting their members of staff to go out and come to school, that's equivalent to saying, well, come on, sue me if you have an accident. So we do need to be mindful of the litigious society in which we live, and that's a real problem for us. However, I think we do need to make sure that where schools can open, they should. I think there are more schools open today, now that some of the deluge of snow that we had yesterday has been cleared away, and people have been making their way into work very carefully. And I know, speaking to a lot of my colleagues who set out at very early hours this morning to try and make sure that their school was at least partially open, so that parents like Mr. Eubank had somewhere to leave their children. So, believe me, every effort is being made to open schools, but it has to be in the context of safety.
Yes, absolutely, and I do fully understand all of that. Another frustration that some people have been finding as well is the sort of communication of information, because lots of schools have different ways of doing it, and actually parents perhaps don't know that the school is closed. Will you think about that again?
Yes, well, clearly, simply putting, and I'm not criticising Mr. Eubank's school, but clearly just putting something on a website where is not sufficient, because many parents will not be able to access that, and indeed if the website crashed, that doesn't help either. In my school, when I was a head, we used to have what we called a phone chain. Therefore, one person phoned 10 people phoned another 10, and very quickly we could contact all parents. So I think communication is very important. And can I pick up the point that Mr. Eubank made about The school was closed even though there was no snow. One of the things we have to listen to, I know this happened in the Kingston area yesterday, is the weather forecast. The weather forecast for London yesterday was a very heavy snow. Now, the worst scenario is getting all the children into school, and then you have blizzard conditions and you can't get them out again. And I quoted yesterday a colleague of mine who bravely opened his school only to be chastised by parents because they felt that he was taking risks with their children's health for opening the school, even though the weather forecast had been dire, and it was quite difficult for those parents to get into school and take them out.
Yes, absolutely. Point well made. Mick Brooks, General Secretary of the National Association of Head Teachers. Thank you.
Now, Eurostar is now running a limited service following the breakdown of a Brussels to London train in the tunnel this morning. The train with over 200 passengers on board was originally travelling from Brussels to London St Pancras Station. Our correspondent Richard Scott is at St Pancras for us now. And Richard, this really does feel like Christmas all over again.
It's a little bit of deja vu, isn't it, John? Yes, well, at least the scene has changed slightly over the last couple of hours. You can see now that most people have managed to get through security also, and that has changed a lot over the last couple of hours because this scene was absolutely packed around 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, as people were waiting to get through security and get onto those trains. The trains are running, but it's a very limited service, and there are a lot of delays for passengers. They won't necessarily know, any of these people, even though they're getting through security, they won't know when they're going to get on a train, because there are, after that breakdown that you mentioned this morning, there are still heavy restrictions on the tunnel. Eurotunnel, which runs the tunnel, is only allowing one Eurostar train through it at any one time because it doesn't want a series of them breaking down and blocking its shuttle services and freight services, so it's not willing to take the risk. That's the cause of delay. Eurostar, of course, is busy investigating, trying to find out why this train broke down in the tunnel this morning. Of course, the suggestion or the suspicion is that perhaps it's the same problem that we saw before Christmas when snow got into the engine and caused all those breakdowns of several trains in the tunnel. It was only one train this morning, and when it arrived at St Pancras this morning, we were there and we spoke to a couple of people from Belgium who had come to London just for a day trip.
We have to wait 2 hours and then to change in Ashford. And no, we are arriving in London and we are trying to enjoy our trip in London.
Yeah, we just came for one day. We started about 6 o'clock in the morning in Belgium, in Brussels, and now we want to see something from the city. And I hope we have a train back to Belgium in a normal way.
Yes, by the sound of it, they might have a couple of days here.
Yes, it could be rather tricky. I mean, they arrived late in London for their planned day out, and of course they don't know exactly when they're going to get home. Eurostar is advising that people only travel if they need to. Clearly these people want to get back to Belgium, but they don't know if there's going to be a train for them. There are trains running, as I say, but they don't know when exactly those will be. It's not exactly a scheduled service at the moment, so it is potentially a long wait for people, and as I say, Eurostar is advising that people postpone a trip if they don't need to travel at the moment. But it's all rather embarrassing for Eurostar. They had all this huge problem before Christmas, which was a bit of a PR disaster for them. They had crowds and crowds of people in this hall not really knowing what was going on, but then of course it was much busier than it is now, so the backlog built up very quickly. Today, remember that you can get 750 people on a Eurostar train, so you get a few hundred people here, you get one train going and they're all off.
OK, Richard Scott, keep an eye on it for us. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
OK, let's catch up with business. Sarah's here. Hello. Hello, thanks very much indeed. Hi. Interest rates have been kept unchanged at 0.5%. That's following the Bank of England's latest meeting. The cost of borrowing has now been at a record low for 10 months. The bank's Monetary Policy Committee also maintained the quantitative easing programme at £200 billion. And house prices in the UK were 1.1% higher in December compared to the year before. That's the first annual rise since March 2008, according to the Halifax. Prices also rose by 1% in December compared with November, making it the 6th consecutive monthly rise. The Halifax says the average price of a home is now worth £169,000. Well, Ray Bulger is from John Charcoal, and he joins me now from Sheffield. Ray, hello to you. December usually a pretty quiet month, but it's quite interesting to see a rise, not only an annual rise, but a rise on November. What do you read into this?
Well, one needs to bear in mind that the Halifax figures are seasonally adjusted, so the real rise in December will undoubtedly have been significantly less than 1%. But I think one of the interesting figures that your viewers may be questioning is why Nationwide last week showed an annual rise of 5.9%, and Halifax today is showing 1.1%. I think one of the key reasons for that is that what Halifax do is to give the average figure over the previous 3 months, whereas Nationwide use the latest figure. And in a market where prices are rising, that of course can mean you get some quite big differences. So I think that's probably the biggest reason for the difference.
And Halifax maintaining that this year it expects property values to be flat. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we'll probably see a small rise, but I think most people will be surprised to see prices go up very much. The big plus for house prices over the last year has been the low interest rates. And all the signs are that bank rate will stay at 0.5% for much, maybe even all of this year. And that will be a real positive factor for house prices. On the other hand, of course, there are plenty of negatives as well. Unemployment, despite slowing down the increase over the last couple of months, is likely to continue rising. And I think after the election will rise further because there are bound to be substantial public sector cuts after the election, and that's bound to mean job cuts. So there's plenty of bad news, but the low interest rates will be what sustains the housing market, in my view.
And Ray, interesting you mentioned about interest rates being low, because there was also a survey out today from Moneyfacts, and that said that despite those low interest rates, 8 mortgage lenders are increasing their standard variable rates. So, you know, those rates are creeping up.
Yeah, the lenders who are increasing their standard variable rates are some of the smaller building societies. Now, they are under quite a lot of pressure. The key problem they have is that they don't have much in the way of fresh money to lend, and consequently they are suffering additional costs, such as their payments to the compensation scheme, which they wouldn't have anticipated 2 years ago. In a normal market, lenders can adjust their margins on the new business because they will be lending some new money, and if they're struggling, then probably most lenders will be struggling, and they can put margins up a bit. If you're not doing any new lending, you just can't do that. So that's one of their big problems.
We must leave it there, but many thanks, Ray Bolger, there in Sheffield. Very quick look at the markets. I can show you there's the London market up by just 3.5 points. No surprises, of course, because of those interest rates remaining on hold. That's it from me. See you again in an hour.
Will do. Thanks very much. See you then.
Time now, a little after 2:45. Let's get you up to date with the headlines. Snow and sub-zero temperatures across the UK are making travel hazardous. Forecasters say the freezing conditions are set to continue for up to a week.
Jonathan Ross is to leave the BBC after 13 years. He'll go when his contract expires in July.
Gordon Brown has brushed off the latest challenge to his leadership as a storm in a teacup. He insisted he'd spent little time considering the challenge to his leadership.
Now let's catch up with the sport, specifically the cricket. And Richard's here. Hello.
Very exciting.
Hi, it is indeed. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go straight there. England's middle order are putting up a good fight as they try to salvage a draw in the third test against South Africa in Cape Town. They gave up the victory run chase, 466 runs, a long time ago, but they're in a good position to save the match. England lost 2 wickets in the morning session, but Paul Collingwood and Ian Bell are frustrating South Africa. A few moments ago, England were 271 for 5, 15 overs left in the match. South Africa still need another 5 wickets to level the series going into the final test, but time, I'm glad to say, is running out for the hosts. Well, Patrick Vieira will have a medical at Manchester City today, with the club hoping to complete his transfer from Inter Milan by tomorrow night. Vieira wants to leave the Italian club to try to secure more first-team football and make sure of a place in France's World Cup squad. The former Arsenal captain will be reunited with City manager Roberto Mancini, who signed him while in charge at Inter. Better late than never for Great Britain's 4x400 metres relay team, who are to be awarded the gold medals they were denied 13 years ago when they were beaten into second place by the United States at the World Championships in Athens. The British quartet of Roger Black, Jamie Bulsh, Ewan Thomas and Mark Richardson have been campaigning to be given the golds from 1997 for over a year, since Antonio Pettigrew, a member of the winning US team, admitted to taking performance-enhancing drugs. The athletes have now been officially awarded their golds, and UK Athletics are planning a ceremony.
We've got 4 new medalists in this country. I mean, we should celebrate the fact that we are world champions. It's not often you get 4x400 metre world champions or world champions of this ilk in sport anyway. So I think, you know, it'd be nice to get something presented. You know, we've missed the moment. There's no question about that. You know, it should have been done at the time. But you know, for me personally, what I want out of it more than anything is to have that medal so I can give it to my children, and my children can give it to their children and be recognised as a world champion.
Quite right too. Now, it was set to be one of the richest fights in boxing history, but it's now officially off. Manny Pacquiao's proposed bout with Floyd Mayweather Jr. was scheduled for March the 13th in Las Vegas, but disagreements over drug testing have finally put paid to it. Pacquiao had been angered by the Mayweather camp's insistence on random blood tests, which aren't routinely used in boxing. The Filipino filed a lawsuit against them in response to claims that he'd taken performance-enhancing drugs. But even though a mediator was brought in to try to resolve the dispute, the fight is off. Tennis now, and the former world #1 Justine Henin is through to the semi-finals of the Brisbane International. It's her first official tournament since her comeback to the sport after a break of almost 2 years, and she certainly lacked some sharpness in her quarter-final against Melinda Sink of Hungary. Henin lost her first 2 service games, but she did manage to take the opening set. The Belgian is a 7 times Grand Slam winner, but this is her first tournament in 20 months, and her rustiness did show as Sink won the second set to draw level, but Henin did come through a tie-break in the decider, and after 2 hours and 20 minutes no less on court, she declared it was just the kind of match she needed. She now plays Ana Ivanovic in the last 4. And we've just heard that another wicket has gone. Paul Collingwood has gone. England now 272 for 6. That's all the sport. I'll be back a little later on.
And how many overs left, do you reckon? Not that long.
14 or so, something like that, I think.
Oh, it's going to be tense. OK.
Thank you. Some breaking news in the last couple of moments or so. This is a man's body has been found under ice in a lake at a country club today. That discovery made at the Lakeside Country Club in Frimley Green in Surrey about 11:15 this morning.
Yeah, Surrey police alerted to the body by a member of staff at the club, and the force has launched an investigation into the cause of the death. No more details at this stage. We'll bring them to you when we get them.
Let's bring up to date with some other of today's news. And Jonathan Ross has announced he is to leave the BBC following months of controversy about his pay and programmes.
Yeah, the broadcaster is leaving after 13 years at the corporation. Now, Ross has been one of the biggest faces at the BBC with his Friday night chat show, of course his Radio 2 show and his film review programme as well. Well, Jonathan Ross spoke to journalists who gathered outside his home in North London a little earlier today.
The statement kind of says it all, really. I've had a great 13 years with the BBC. I think it's probably not a bad time for me to move on, and probably not a bad time for them either. So, you know, it's been terrific. I would love to stay and make more shows, but I've got 6 months left. I'm going to go back and try and make the best shows of my career with them, and then... Jonathan.
Well, I'm joined now by the writer and media commentator Steve Hewlett, who joins us in the studio. Steve, is it as simple as that? Just wants to concentrate on other projects?
Well, look, I'm sure that... Well, I'm pretty sure that the BBC are hopeful that this will draw a line under what has been, in general, a pretty unhappy episode, and I imagine Jonathan Ross feels the same. I mean, the association for both parties has become almost a kind of shorthand, you know, for things that are wrong, and it goes right back to the start. When it emerged that he was being paid £18 million over 3 years, first of all, people said, this is just extraordinary. How can you possibly spend that many licence fees on a chat show presenter? I mean, the BBC said, well, look, and the people in the BBC who did it, of course, didn't imagine there was anything wrong with this. They thought, well, the market would pay more, and that was true. There were other players in the market, Channel 4 not least, who would, in theory, who would have been prepared to pay more than that. So they said, well, that's the market rate, we should pay it. Because what did that open up? The bigger question, which has plagued the BBC ever since, about whether they really understand the difference between being a full market player and being the BBC funded by the licence fee. The BBC Trust then came along and said they agreed with the management, and it made them look, they're desperate to establish their independence, and it made them look a bit as if they were reading straight from Mark Thompson's notebook. And then latterly, of course, Ross Brand, what else can you say?
Steve, I suspect if this was a politician, the question I'd be asking you now is, you know, did he jump or was he pushed? It's possible in this case that it was both.
I think it probably is both. Look, I mean, these things have a habit of happening in this way. You know, both sides kind of sense the way the wind is blowing, and kind of that's... Look, if Jonathan Ross had come along and said, right, I want to negotiate a new contract, the BBC would have been in a difficult position, but would have had to find a way, I think, of saying, thanks, but no thanks. As it happens, both sides, I think, will really be hoping this draws a line under it. You don't underestimate the damage that Jonathan Ross, notwithstanding that he's a great broadcaster and that no one intended this, don't underestimate the damage he's done to the BBC. He probably cost them £1.5 billion in the licence fee settlement when the 18 million broke. Ross Brand has caused all sorts of ructions, and it's left the BBC Trust on occasion looking the opposite of what they wish to appear as, which is rather too close to the management for comfort.
And do you think it will lead to a slightly different way in which the way in the way in which the BBC does contracts for big star presenters, rather than giving them this sort of big portmanteau role with a television show and a big radio show and all the rest of it all?
Maybe, although, look, you know, the fact that Ross is a very very talented chap, and, you know, is brilliant on radio and can be brilliant on television too. In one sense, that all sort of makes sense. I mean, in the short term, you know, big handcuff deals, right, are probably a little bit of a thing of the past. But it's only temporary, this. As soon as the economy recovers, as soon as competition re-enters the broadcasting marketplace, all the broadcasters will start doing handcuffs deals again. Now, the thing about handcuffs deals is you do them, you stop the opposition from getting hold of the talent, and the minute you've done them, you think, oh dear, what are we going to do with this talent? We've got the handcuffs around. So it is a cyclical thing. So handcuffs are not history. Jonathan Ross, I'm sure, will re-emerge elsewhere, although in the short term, probably not on a long-term exclusive contract, I would have thought.
Steve, very interesting. Thanks very much for being with us. Thank you.
And just briefly, I've been reading your text about whether or not schools should open. Thank you very much for those, and we'll try and read some of them out later. 61124 if you want to send us some. And we'll be talking to somebody about how you should drive in these conditions later.
Sarah, the weather. You're going to tell us whether we should be driving or not.
Well, I mean, it is looking very cold and pretty treacherous, in fact, on those roads. That's the way it looks for the rest of this week, perhaps even for the next few weeks. And it's all down to these bitterly cold temperatures. Last night we saw nearly minus 18 degrees, and tonight it could get even colder still, down to perhaps minus 20 in one or two spots. So bitterly cold. It's not quite the coldest on record. We have seen lows of minus 27.2 degrees, but not far off the coldest weather on record. Still weather warnings in force for heavy snow and widespread icy conditions, so do take care on those roads. By about 6 o'clock this evening, then, we've still got some flurries of snow around these north-east coasts of England, through East Yorkshire, down towards Lincolnshire, and for a good part of East Anglia. With that easterly or north-easterly breeze, it is feeling very cold, and we may see some further accumulations of snow across the far south-east of England as well. Move further west, and most places seeing a brighter end to the day, but widespread frost. Still a few wintry showers around across the far west of Cornwall, for the Isles of Scilly and for Pembrokeshire as well. A few centimetres of snow possible here, but for a good part of Wales, it's a cold, bright and a frosty end to the day. Now, clear skies into this evening across Northern Ireland too. That frost and ice reforming very quickly once the sun goes down this evening, and a severe frost too across a good part of Scotland, still with a risk of those wintry showers for eastern areas. Now, that's the way it looks throughout the night. We're keeping these wintry showers for many eastern parts of Scotland, north-east England, East Anglia, down into the south-east as well. Further west, it's going to be a bit of a drier story to tell tonight, but wherever you are, widespread frost, ice and temperatures really are going to plummet. A few snow showers moving a little bit further inland, and look at these temperatures. Now, that's going to be the overnight lows in our city centres, even colder than that in the surrounding countryside. So Friday certainly starting on a very cold note, yet again, very icy, widespread frost. I think during the day most places will see quite a good deal of winter sunshine, still one or two showers around parts of London, Kent, East Sussex and the northeast of England as well throughout the course of the day. Temperatures are going to hover a couple of degrees either side of freezing. And why is it so cold? Well, it's all down to these easterly winds coming in off the continent from the northeast or east, and they're going to be picking up during the course of the weekend, so bitingly cold and a real wind chill, making those temperatures feel even colder than they are. So further risk of frost and ice during the course of the weekend, and there's quite a bit more snow in the forecast too, so do keep tuned to all your latest weather.